Alright, let's talk about the dialog command. Dialog is a Linux command that you can use to build very simple GUIs, graphical interfaces, that you can put on top of bash scripts that you might be writing. And it's a kind of old school looking thing, but the advantage is you can run it from a plain old terminal window. So if you're running PuTTY, or if SSHing into the server, you can still use the dialog command, and you can get something like graphical elements that you can interact with either through your keyboard or through your mouse. And the command is dialog. There's a manual page for it that you can look at, but the manual page is not necessarily the most helpful. If you do dialog dash dash help, you get a really nice, concise list of all of the options and then all the types, different types of widgets that you can create. So I want to just play with a few of these and give you a basic idea of how this works, the general structure of all these different commands, how we can capture some output, and then we'll do a bunch of problems where you get to practice with this. So let's start with a really basic command, which is just an info box. So I'm going to say dialog dash dash info box, and then I'll put in whatever message I want to display, and it's got to go inside double quotes so that this all counts as a single argument. And then we follow it usually with a pair of zeros. This corresponds to the height and width of the box, and 0 means size it automatically. So there's my one command, and it pops up this cool little, floating box that says here's an info box. It's got a little shadow on the bottom, and so on and so forth. All right, so a couple of comments. One, we can customize the heck out of this. We can change colors, we can make the shadow appear or disappear, and so on and so forth, which is nice. But remember, this is all ASCII character based, right? This is really just sending characters to your display, and your terminal program, PuTTY, or my console program here, is set up to interpret those in certain ways. And if you're doing this on PuTTY, you may find that instead of getting a nice little box, you're getting a bunch of Q's and E's and things like that. So let's look at how we make this work through PuTTY, because sometimes you have to change an option. So let me go ahead and log into PuTTY. This is assuming I know my password, which I don't think I do. Hey, there we go. All right, so here's my PuTTY session. Let's try this. So dialog info box testing 00, and there's my info box. And you notice that I've got these Q's over here and a K in the corner and a J and that kind of thing. That's not what we want. All right. So let me get out of here and rerun PuTTY. And let me show you how to set that up. So come down here under Window, and let's go down to enable VT100 line drawing even in UTF-8 mode. So VT100 is a really old terminal. Before we had PuTTY and things like that, you would buy a physical piece of hardware, and probably the most popular terminal at the time was a VT100 made by Digital Equipment Corp. And VT100s, among other things, they interpreted certain combinations of characters in ways that would let them display symbols, like pieces of lines or corners or things like that. And it was a really well-designed character set, and it was so well-designed that it's still kind of the de facto standard. And so even in 2023, PuTTY will support VT100 line drawing. So I'm going to set that option. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to say save, and now if I open this up, and let's try our dialog command again. Right, now I've got a nice box like I was expecting. It looks like a widget that you would hope to work with. So so that's how we set up PuTTY if you're getting weird characters. All right, so I'll stick with my console session here. So info box, right, lets us just display a piece of information. Now, there's also something called a message box. And a message box is almost the same, except it's got this OK button. So it displays a message, but it pauses until the person says OK. So you can do this, you know, in your program, like for example, your high-low program, we could have made a message box that said, you know, think of a number, let me know when you're ready, and then the person could say OK to continue the script. All right, so while we're here, there's a few ways we can respond to these buttons. So one way is to press the Enter key. Another way, if we're currently sitting on a button that we like, we can hit the space bar, and that selects. Another way is, you know, there's a highlighted character, the letter O here, and if we had multiple buttons, each button would have a different highlighted character. We can hit that character, and that'll act as clicking the button. Or we can come in with the mouse and we can click on the button, and that activates the button. So so that's our basic interaction. There's a number of things we can do to stylize these boxes. For example, on all of these boxes, we can do a switch to put a title on the top. So we can say dash dash title. And we'll just say waiting for user. And so now there's this little title showing up at the top, waiting for a user. There's my info, and then there's the OK button. And you notice that the size of this got adjusted automatically, right? The box got wider because I had said I want to make this box exactly, you know, as big as it needs to be. That's what the 0, 0 does. Now, if I had done this with, you know, like 40, 0, then it would make my box, you know, 40 lines high. And if I did this with 40, 60, it would make it 60 lines, columns wide, 40 lines high, right? So usually we just do 0, 0, and it auto sizes it, which is convenient. All right, so another useful type of box for dialog is the program box. So we can say dialog dash dash program box and put in the name of any program we want here, like uptime, and it will display a box with the contents of that command in it. The box size is fixed, and so, you know, our uptime got cut off, but we could rerun this with some specific dimensions. So we could make this 10 by 50. And now we can see, you know, more of our message there. So if we want to, for example, you know, have a talking cow, let's do a cow say, hello, Nick. And let's make it, you know, 20 by 60. Right? So now we've got a message box with a clickable button on it with a talking cow inside. And if we wanted to make this message something more interesting, we could say something like, you know, $ parentheses date. And so now this will run the command cowsay with an argument which is the result of capturing standard out from the date command, and it'll display it in a message box. So we run that, and there's a cow telling us what the date is, and we can click on the OK button and come back to a prompt. So program boxes are pretty useful. Another useful box is the yes/no box. And so we can say, you know, yes, no, and we can put a prompt for the user and our usual 0, 0 at the end. And now we get a box, and it says, you know, make a choice, yes, no. So here, you know, I can use the arrow keys to move from one choice to another. I can use the tab key. If I were to hit a Y, that would immediately choose yes. If I were to hit an N, that would immediately choose no. And I can, of course, use the mouse to point and click on one of these. So if I want no, I can just go like this, and I've made a choice of no. So how do we know what the choice was that the user made? So the usual way we check the return status from a bash command is to look at the variable $?? So if I echo $?? Remember I said no, it'll show me $? is 1. Now if instead I make the choice yes, $? will be 0. So looking at that variable immediately after the dialog command will let me know, did the user click yes or no. And you've got to do it right away, right? So I just click no, and if I look at $? It's a 1. If I look at $? Again, it's a 0. Why? Because this variable always shows you the result of the prior instruction. The prior instruction was not dialog, it was an echo statement. And usually this variable tells you if there was an error in the previous command that you just ran. 0 generally means no error, 1 means error. For dialog, 0 means you said yes, 1 means you said no. All right, so let me make a test file. So there's just a random 5-line test file. All right, so another option we have is a text box, and text box takes the name of a file and it displays its contents. And this is a read-only dialog, so if I try to click in here, it kicks me out of dialog. But if we want to be able to have the user interact with the text that's displayed, we can use an edit box. With no space. And now I have an editing window where I can see my text, but I can move around with my cursor, and I can type, and I can delete, and I can add new lines, and so on and so forth. Now if I say OK, I get all this stuff appearing on my screen. My file itself has not changed. Edit boxes don't actually change the file. What they do is they let the person edit a copy of the file, and then when you exit the program, it will give you a copy of the new file contents on standard out. So for us to do anything with this, we need to look at how we're going to capture standard out from a command. And so far our dialogues have mostly been either just displaying information or getting a little bit of feedback from the user in the form of clicking a button. But it's possible that the user might want to give us some more information than just a yes or a no response. And so let me show you one other dialogue, and then we'll come back to this and talk about how to capture the output. So there's a thing called an input box, and an input box, we put in a prompt. We can say enter your name, and we get a box like this, says enter your name, and I can type my name there and say OK. Alright, when I say OK, it printed out the word Nick. So this command will generate an output when you exit, and that output will contain what the person typed. So there's a very particular way that we can capture this output. So there's two things we have to do. First of all, we have to say --output-fd 1. And that says, hey, send the output to standard out. And then the other thing we do is we say name equals $paren, and we put the whole dialog command inside a $paren block. So this says run dialog, make an input box, prompt with this, set the default height and width, send the output to standard out, so 1 is the file descriptor for standard out, and then take all of that, and instead of displaying what goes to standard out, capture it, and in this case store it in a bash variable named name. So if I run this, it says, what is your name? I can say Nick J. It doesn't display anything, but now if I look at the variable $name, it's got my name in it. And if I run this again and I put in something different and I look at $name, it's what I just typed in. Now if I hit the cancel button, my name ends up being blank. So how do I know that the person hit cancel instead of entering a blank name? Well, we use $? So if I say OK, and I look at $question, $question will be 0. If I hit the cancel button, $question will be 1. So we can use both the name that we're capturing by, grabbing standard out, and the exit status, $? To figure out exactly what the user did when they responded to this dialog. So with that edit box, we could say, file equals $dialog edit box test file 00 -- output -fd1. So now we're running an edit box on test file, and we're capturing standard out and sending it into this bash variable named file. So here's my line of text, and I'm going to just get rid of a couple of lines here. And I'll add something new. And if I say OK, right, I don't get any output on my screen here, but now if I look at this variable $file, it's got the contents of my file. Now it all comes out on one line, which is a little, awkward to work with, but it's got, the contents including my new second line that I typed in there. So this can be useful sometimes if you want a user to make, simple changes to a file. What else have we got? Dialog, calendar. So we can say calendar and pick a date, and this pops up a calendar. And I can use my arrow keys to change the month, and I can change the year, and I can pick a date, and I can go to a different month, and so on and so forth. And then when I'm satisfied with the date, I can click OK. And you notice it prints out a line of text with a day, a month, and a year. So again, we can capture this. Like this. And so, I don't know, I'll just pick November 20th. And now if I echo your date, it's 20th November 2023. Now there's options we can use in Dialog to change the format of this, to pick out different fields and so on and so forth. But we also have the ability to do this using any of our other tools that we've been learning about in Bash. So I could echo $your date, pipe it into awk with a field separator of slash, and say print year and month and day. And there's 2023, November 20th. Right, so we never have to dig terribly deeply into the specifics of one particular command. If we know a handful of commands for processing text, breaking text into fields, using regular expressions, and so on and so forth, we can customize our output from commands after the command has run by doing things like that. All right, so we've got text box, edit boxes, calendar boxes. We looked at input boxes. Let me show you one more option that gets a little confusing but is pretty useful to work with. And this is for making a checklist. So dialog checklist, and make some choices will be my prompt. And 0, 0 is, the default sizes, and I'm going to have 3 options to choose from. So I'm going to tag my first option with A, and I'm going to call this first choice. And I'm going to have this selected by default, and then I'm going to have B, second choice, and this will be off by default, and then I'll have C, last option, and that'll be off by default. So when I do all of that, I get, a nice little menu of options, and I can click on any of these, and clicking will toggle whether it's selected or not. And I can also type something like a C to hop down to C, and I can hit a space bar to select it or deselect it, and so on and so forth. And then when I say OK, notice I've got A and C selected. I get an output which says AC. So if I wanted to grab all of this, I could say choices equals $paren, all of that stuff. And now if I, and I have to do the output FD. And so now let's just select B and C and say OK. And now if I look at my variable choices, it's got a B and a C. So you can do this with a radio list instead of a checklist, and there's some practice problems for doing that. You can also make menus with the menu option, and there's some practice problems to work with that. We can also customize these dialogues a number of ways. We can add extra buttons. We can change the names of our buttons. And if you look at dialog help and go up to the general options, right, we have something like extra label. So we can create an extra button, right, with a dash extra button. We can give it a label with extra label. We can change the yes label to something else. We can change the no label to something else right here. We can get rid of the OK button, and so on and so forth. So you can explore these, you can try them. They're pretty simple to work with once you have a basic dialog command running. But get the basics going first with something like a calendar dialog or an input box, and then feel free to explore these different options as well as different types of boxes, and see what you can do. There's a password box, which is like an input box, but it doesn't echo what you type, so that you can have the person type something in without it being displayed, and so on and so forth. So that's the basic of dialog, and you're going to get to work with this extensively for your final homework project for this class, where you'll be making a bash program that interacts with the user through a set of GUIs, graphical interfaces, and we'll be using dialogbox to do that. So we'll get some practice in the practice problems in class, and then you get to dig deeper on your final homework project. All right, that's it for dialog.